Hey guys, it's Shara from Woodshop Diaries and welcome to part 3 of my drawer building series. In part 1, we determined our drawer dimensions, and in part 2, we took those dimensions and actually built the drawer box. Now in part 3, we're going to install the slides and the drawer box into the cabinet. For this video, I'm going to be using side mount ball bearing drawer slides. Now these are my favorite types of drawer slides to use in my projects because they're relatively inexpensive, easy to install, and they don't require any additional bracing or framing like undermount slides would in a lot of applications. There are definitely other types of drawer slides out there, but I'm going to be using these in this video. These just install directly onto the side panel and they have slotted holes for easy adjustments. You can get these slides with or without soft close mechanisms. These do not have a soft close mechanism, but if they did, it's basically just a little plastic attachment here with a spring in it so that they slide back slowly. I mentioned in part 1 of the series that these slides typically come in 2-inch increments in sizes from about 10 to 24 inches. Here I'm using 16-inch slides. If you extend these slides all the way out, you'll see a little tab here. You can lift up on the tab to loosen it and take this part of the slide off of this part. This part mounts to the side of the cabinet. This part mounts to the drawer. You can put them back together by just sliding them back till it clicks. So first, I'm gonna mount the slides onto the cabinet. Now you can definitely mount your slides onto your project with it standing up, but I prefer to lay my project over if possible, so I can allow gravity to hold the slide in place while I screw it in. Obviously not every application, you're going to be able to lay it over on its side. So if you need to install these vertically, you can either use a clamp, a scrap block, or even a Craig drawer jig to help you kind of keep your drawer slides in place where you want them while you screw them in. Now you'll notice in this application that my side panels are flush all the way across, so I can just mount this directly to it. Now in some applications that you run into, especially with face frames, you're gonna have additional framing here, so the inside of your panel may not line up with the inside of your frame. In those cases, you can't mount your drawer slide directly to that inside panel. It's just gonna hit the back of the face frame here, and it won't be able to open. So in those cases, you'll need to cut and glue and screw a scrap block here that would give you somewhere to mount your slides so that they would be still flush to the inside of this frame. Something like this. So I would mount this where I want to put my drawer slides and have it be flush across the inside here, and then I can mount my drawer slide on top of it, and that would allow me to open my drawer. Obviously, every application will vary, so these would need to be cut to fit, basically just the thickness here so that it would be flush across the inside of the frame. This is one of those things I try to keep in mind when I'm building my project. I try to build in such a way to avoid having to use any spacer blocks with my drawer slides just because it's an extra piece of the puzzle and just kind of a pain in the butt. But obviously, you're going to run into it at some point or another, and that's how you would deal with it. When installing drawer slides, if my drawer fronts are gonna be overlay, I usually mount the front edge of the slide flush to the front edge of the cabinet. But if I'm installing drawer slides with fronts that will be inset, I take a scrap block the same thickness as my drawer front will be. In this case, I'm gonna use 3/4 inch plywood for my drawer front, so I have a 3/4 inch plywood scrap block. I'm just going to push the slide back until my scrap block is flush to the front. And then I'll butt my slide up to the back edge of this. I always start my slides from the bottom and work my way up. I'll mount the bottom slide directly on top of the bottom framing here. And I'll use a speed square to make sure that it's square. I hold the slide tight in place and then open it all the way. You'll notice here that these slides have slotted holes and oversized holes and then small holes. The slotted holes are helpful for adjustments, but I also think that they're probably there to allow for wood movement. So a lot of times if you're using a solid wood panel here, it would need to expand and contract a little bit. So these slotted holes this way will allow it to do so. However, since I'm using plywood in this case, it really doesn't matter. So I'm just going to put a screw in the front, middle, and back to hold it in place. Because I'm screwing into a 3/4 inch panel, I'm just gonna use 5/8 inch wood screws so that it won't go all the way through to the other side. Now, if you can't access the very front holes here to drive one in, the little tab that separates the pieces of the slide is right under here. So you can just push it and slide this out so you can access these front holes. Now, it's not critical which holes that you put your screws in. I just put one in the front, one in the middle, and one in the back. The two in the back here are in slotted holes, and I put the one in the front in a single small hole. If you put all of your screws in a slotted hole, there is potential for this to move back and forth a little. You may not want that, so I like to put slotted holes in the back here and then a single hole in the front. Now that I have my bottom slide in place, I'm going to work my way up the cabinet. So since there aren't any individual frames between all of these drawers, I need to measure where this slide needs to go. There's a couple ways that I typically do this. One way is that I'll just take the height of the drawer front below it and add an inch. So in this case, my drawer front heights are 5 3/4 inches. So I'd position the bottom of my next slide up 5 3/4 plus 1 inch from the inside of the frame. Now I'm measuring from the inside frame here because these are inset drawer fronts. If I was doing overlay drawer fronts, this still works, but you would need to measure from the overlay, not the inside frame. The next slide up would just be the sum of the fronts below it plus 1 inch. So in this case, 5 3/4 plus 5 3/4 plus 1 inch. This works in many cases, but it doesn't give you the most consistent spacing results. So another way to do this is by lining up the bottom edge of the slides with the bottom edge of the drawer fronts. So in part 1 of this video series, I suggested that you draw a sketch of your project so that you can visualize where your spacing and your drawer fronts are going to be. You can reference that sketch here to make marks on the front of your cabinet, just little pencil marks where the bottoms of each drawer front will be. In this case, my drawer fronts are inset, so I take the 1/8 inch gap plus the height of the drawer front plus another 1/8 inch gap, and I see that my next drawer front bottom edge is 6 inches up from the inside frame. So this is where I install the bottom edge of my next drawer slide. Again, if you're doing overlay, you would need to measure from your overlay, not the inside frame. Then I just work my way up and add my next drawer front plus the 1/8 inch gap, and I see that my next drawer front bottom edge is 11 7/8 inches up from the inside frame. So again, this is where I install the bottom edge of my next drawer slide. This way will give you more consistent spacing results, but again, the drawer front height plus an inch would also work in most cases as well. As long as you mount your slide within that range of where your drawer front's going to be, you can get your box where you need it to go. This is always a lot easier if there is framing involved. Notice that the top drawer of this cabinet does have this additional frame, so I always just mount my slides right above the divider or framing if there is any. Now these slides are mounted on this side. I have to flip it over and repeat that again to mount the slides on the other side. So now that we have our slides in the cabinet, it's time to install the boxes. Now, I know a lot of people actually take the slides apart to install them onto the boxes, but I personally prefer to install the boxes into the cabinets onto the slides. Just like the slides, I like to start at the bottom and work my way up. So I'm going to install the bottom drawer first, then the middle, two, and then the top. I have some 1/4 inch plywood pieces here, and I put those along the bottom framing here to rest the bottom drawer on so that it stays about 1/4 inch up off this frame. So that way when it pulls in and out, it's not going to rub on anything. Once I set my box in place, I pull my slides out flush to the front edge of the drawer box on both sides. And I use the same 5/8 inch wood screws here. You'll notice that these parts of the slide also have slotted holes. Since this is plywood, I'm not really worried about wood movement here. So the slotted holes in this case are more for just adjustment options. Putting screws in the vertical slots will allow you to move the drawer up and down. Putting screws in the horizontal slots will allow you to move the drawer front to back. And putting screws in the little single hole will allow you no adjustments. So it's kind of up to you whether or not you want the ability to adjust. If you're new to drawers and you want to be able to play with it a little bit, I suggest using these slotted holes. Now you can just barely see there's some holes here through these little slots. If you can't access the back holes, you can simply use these tabs to disconnect this piece of the slide from this piece of the slide, pull the drawer out, and then you can access those holes. But in this case, I can see them, so I'm just going to add another screw here in the back. That way I've got a screw in the back, the middle, and the front. So now that the bottom drawer is installed, I just basically use some scrap blocks to rest on top of it to be able to install the next one. Before screwing in, make sure that the drawer is properly spaced so that it won't interfere with the drawer fronts above and below it. I work my way up installing the drawer boxes using these spacer blocks. And just like with everything else, this is always a little easier when the drawers are individually framed out. In those cases, some scrap 1/4 inch plywood underneath the drawer is all you need. These two cabinets are exactly the same. Same size drawers. The only difference is that for this cabinet, I use the drawer spacing method about the drawer fronts plus 1 inch. And in this case, I lined up the bottom of my slides with the bottom of where the drawer fronts will go. You could install the drawer boxes by simply removing this portion of the drawer slide and just mounting it flush along the bottom edge of the drawer box. However, in this case, since the drawer slides are not all lined up with the very bottom of the drawer box, notice that the slide here is more towards the middle than the bottom. For this, I like to use spacer blocks. And for this, if you wanted, you could just mount flush to the bottom. You just want to make sure that your drawer box fits within where that drawer front is going to be located. And now I have a simple cabinet with 4 drawers installed. In the next video, we'll be adding the drawer fronts to wrap up the series. Now that installing the slides and the drawer boxes is kind of one of those things where there's a lot of personal preference involved. There's a lot of different ways to do it. I highly encourage you to give drawers a try and figure out what works best for you. I hope this has given you some ideas and hopefully helped you get a little bit less intimidated with drawers. I'm gonna wrap up the series in the next video installing the drawer fronts. So I hope you'll stay tuned. Be sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell if you don't wanna miss it when it comes out. Thanks so much for watching, friends. And until next time, happy building.